Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the PM Learning Series. My name is Shavi. I'm the host for the show today. I'm also a product manager at LinkedIn. Please drop in the chat where you're joining us from. And we have very, very exciting topics to dive in today. So, as some of you might know, that the PM Learning Series is a series of live streaming events where industry thought leaders and product builders share their product journey as well as lessons learned along the way to inspire product builders like you to level up your product career. So make sure you go to the events details page to subscribe to our newsletter so that you can receive recaps of key event updates from events like today, from our today's conversation, as well as stay up to date with future events that we have. We have a full lineup all the way till the summer, so make sure you don't miss out on some of those exciting events and conversations. So today with me, I have a very special guest, Jeff. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Shavi. Nice to see you. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Thank you. So Jeff helps organization build better products and executives building the culture that builds better products. So Jeff is the co-author of the award-winning book Lean UX and the Harvard Business Review press book Sense and Respond. And Jeff, I didn't tell you when I was reaching out to you, but I think I was one of those early readers who read your book. I matched up the timeline. I was like, wow, that was the time actually when the book first came out, and that's how I picked up. It was also during the time when I started to consider going into product development as like a sort of a formal career. So those two books were definitely some of the foundational, books that I read that helped shape my product career. So thank you so much, Jeff.
My pleasure.
So
nice to
Jeff started off his career as a software engineer. Jeff now works as a coach, consultant, and keynote speakers, helping companies breach the gaps between business agility, digital transformation, product management, and human-centered design. All good stuff that we're going to talk a lot about today. Most recently, Jeff co-founded Sense and Response Press, a publishing house for practical business books for busy executives. So his most recent book, which I also enjoyed reading, it was only like 92 pages or something that you can finish reading pretty quickly. It's called Forever Employable. That was published in the midst of COVID in June 2020. I think with a lot of stuff blowing up, with generative AI, Jeff, I think our audience would probably really wanted to hear your perspective on how to stay forever employable in today's, fastly disrupted environment. But before we dive into that, I just want to say hi to a couple folks. We have Rifa from India, Ellie from Atlanta, Paula from Sweden, folks joining from California, Boston, Vancouver, Michigan, Guatemala. Wow. San Francisco, Pittsburgh, London. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that it can be, almost close to dinner time on a Friday for some folks joining us from Europe. And thank you so much, Jeff, for making this the last part of your busy week.
Exactly.
Awesome. So let's dive in. Jeff, I mentioned a little bit about you started off your career as a software engineer. I think you moved into design, but can you just maybe travel back the memory lane and tell us a little bit about your career journey and also the original story of how you developed the Lean UX concept?
Absolutely. So I started my career in the late 90s as a web designer, which was a job title back then, which basically meant this is in 1999. Which meant that if you could spell HTML in 1999, you could get a job. I could spell HTML. I could even do some markup and do some basic graphic design. So I was a web designer in the kind of the early days of the web. Shortly thereafter, as the web became more interactive, I moved into information architecture, courtesy of inspiration from Lou Rosenfeld and Peter Morville's book, Information Architecture for the World Wide Web. That book really changed my life, gave me a sense of direction with my tech career. And then over the next 10 years or so, kind of went from IA to interaction design, UX design, et cetera, and then eventually moved into leading some small design teams. And I found myself in the mid 2000s or so, leading design teams that were trying to succeed in agile software development environments, and it was hard, and we didn't know how to do it, and there weren't a lot of really good answers in the mid and late 2000s about this particular challenge. And so we began to work on that challenge within our own team. I met other folks taking on the same types of challenges. And shortly thereafter, that's kind of as we began to figure out how to do good design work within an agile software development environment, um, that's kind of where these lean UX concepts began to come from. And so that's when I started writing about this stuff and sharing it and talking about it at conferences. And then the book came out, and that was exciting and really helped change the trajectory of my career. On the back of that book, I worked with Josh Seiden, who was my co-author, and a third entrepreneur named Giff Constable, to launch a consulting company called Proof Labs in New York that was designed to build digital products in the ways that we talked about in lean UX. And that grew into a larger consulting company called, it was called, oh my God, it was called Neo. Forgive me. My gosh, I completely blanked on the name there. And then when Neo was sold to Pivotal Labs, I went solo. And for the last 8 years or so, I've been working as a solo practitioner, consulting, coaching, training, speaking, etc. But the Lean UX stuff was born about 12 or so years ago in for me in New York when I was the director of UX at the Ladders.
Yeah. I think what struck me from your intro is that you have gone through sort of the major phases of the evolution of how we think about product development methodology, like starting from lean UX, like traditional UX methods, but also agile, lean UX. There's a lot more, I think, in the past decade also, concepts like design thinking, business model generation, lean startup, lean product playbook, and now lean UX. Can you maybe help our audience to level set a little bit about, hey, what is the lean UX process and how is it different or complementary to the many other school of thoughts that have developed over the past decade?
Yeah, and so it's a great question because look, none of us invented anything, right? Um, Agile, lean startup design thinking, right? All of us are working off of others' work. And so I credit heavily lean startup, design thinking, the agile movement, et cetera, and the kind of the inspirations for those types of folks with the work that we were doing to figure out lean UX, right? We essentially what we've done is we've taken the principles initially of agility, the principles within design thinking, the principles of lean startup, and we applied them to design work. So if you read the first edition of lean UX, it's very heavily focused on design work. Like, how do you do design in agile? It's now in its third edition, and the scope of the book has actually grown a bit to be more along the lines of how do you build successful digital products in an agile environment. But initially, it was really focused on taking a lean approach, an experimental, a continuous learning approach, all of which comes from design thinking and lean startup and agile and scrum and so forth, and applying it to the design process. How do we make it more collaborative? How do we reduce the risk of designing something in a lot of detail that people don't actually want? And so we borrowed the concept of hypotheses, and we borrowed the concept of experiment, and we borrowed the concept of short cycle time, and the concept of iteration and continuous learning, and we built a design process on top of those ideas. Because in the entirety of my career leading up to that point, the design process was part of a waterfall process. There was a window of time where you got to do it. And in most cases, designers would deploy every tool that they had to its fullest capacity to do as much design as possible during that time frame. And what would end up happening is that we would create all these artifacts, and only a fraction of the work that we ever did got implemented, which was tremendously wasteful and frankly depressing, right? Because you spent all this time doing this work, and on a good day 50% of it saw the light of day. And so how do we change that? And that's where it came from. And since then, in the decades since lean UX came out, Now in its third edition, the scope of the book has really grown from beyond design into more product development. So really taking cross-functional collaboration to heart, shared understanding to heart, and continuous learning to heart, and defining a process that works for designers as well as for product managers, as well as for engineers and the teams that they work on together.
That's awesome, seeing the revolution. I definitely had work in environments where there was heavy waterfall approach, that you design everything and requirement up front, took a year to build, and then realized, okay, the market has changed. So definitely liking the more iterative approach from a lean process standpoint. I wanted to ask you, for the years that you spent, helping organizations and business executives adopt and integrate, this new way of thinking, this new way of work into their business product development process. Are there any case studies you can share how they put this into practice, and what works well, what's most challenging? Because I can imagine if organizations have traditionally worked mostly in a waterfall approach, this requires quite a bit of a cultural change. So just wanted to hear sort of like best practice you learned, some hard lessons, something that was really challenging that didn't work, what surprised you, and yeah.
So the one of the best case studies I have for this is a project I did with a company in New York. It's an online learning company in New York about 7 years ago at this point. It's been a little while, but the example is a really great case study of this. So this is an organization that sells online learning products, and their online learning product was a single event like a single learning event product. And so it was preparation for a test. And so you would only take this test once in your life. And so there was a preparation event where you would buy this product, and it was an expensive product from this company, prepare for the test, take the test, and then move on with your life, and never kind of come back and buy from them. And the interesting thing is that the industry as a whole was moving towards subscription products. And one of the biggest competitors in this particular online learning space was Khan Academy. Khan Academy provided very similar content, perhaps in a less structured way, but it provided it for free. And so this company faced an existential crisis. The business model for the industry was shifting. And it was a business model that to them never really made sense for a singular event, right? How do you sell subscription to an event that happens once and then you never look back? And they were facing an existential crisis from a competitor who was literally being funded by Bill Gates, right? And so they had infinite money, right? Khan Academy is never going to run out of money, right? And really interesting challenge. And so we needed to figure out how to build a subscription service, in theory, that made sense for the target audience, these learners, and that competed in quality with Khan Academy to such an extent that people were willing to actually pay for it. That was the business problem statement. Pretty challenging, actually. Really fun, really challenging. Fun for me because I was consulting, but for them it was existential, which is probably a lot less fun. But nevertheless, and what they did was amazing. They had some ideas. We really focused on kind of the two big lean UX questions, right? The two big lean UX questions are, once we've identified sort of a hypothesis for how we'd like to move forward, which we worked on, was what's the most important thing we need to learn right now, and what's the least amount of work that we need to do to learn it. And this is how we come up with our experiments. And what this team did was they strung together a series of very lightweight experiment types. They started with a landing page test to gauge interest in this subscription product. So they just put up essentially an ad on their main website, which got a lot of views on a regular basis, that said, "Hey, we've got a new service, a subscription service, kind of, and it cuts down the product that they had had a big price tag. So now the price tag was this big, divided over 12 to 24 months of subscription, and they got signups, and then they took small cohorts of people who signed up for this product, and they put them through a strung together a Wizard of Oz user experience. Wizard of Oz test means that there was actually no code behind the scenes. The experience that the cohorts were seeing felt seamless to a certain extent, but behind the scenes, the whole thing was being managed by humans via email and video conferencing calls, existing content modules, and the back end of the service was a Trello board, which was amazing. It was a Trello board where every column in the Trello board was a step in the user experience, and every card was a student. And we kind of moved the students manually from step to step to know where everybody was. And our measure of success was renewal rates. If we could get people to renew their subscription after every 3 months at a rate of about 75%, which is what the company decided was their success threshold, then that would give us enough evidence to justify actually building software to automate this process. And we did that. It was actually amazing to see how successful this series of experiments were in driving that behavior change and then justifying the investment in building out the whole service and the subscription service. Because to be clear, it wasn't just redesigning a course content and selling it a different way. The entire accounting system for the company was based around one-time sales, not subscription. And so they really had to rewrite everything top to bottom, and they needed evidence to prove it, and they got it through this series of experimentation. It worked really well.
I really love that example, both mostly also from like knowing what you want to learn up front, like the most important learning goal, and then the least amount of effort, right? Like a painted door desk, and then nothing was real, nothing was in code. And then there's there's a success metrics to measure that as well. So thanks for sharing that. I guess as a success example, I wonder if you have case studies where there's like more challenge, maybe things didn't work out as expected, because where I'm coming from was one of the major, I guess, criticism, or maybe criticism isn't necessarily the right word. It sounded a little harsher than it sound, is the notion of when you're iterating a lot. Sometimes you're pivoting all the time. You're missing out like the true north, the vision that you wanted to build. So how do you find that right balance of like knowing where you want to go, and then but also being agile and learn and like pivot when necessary? So how do you find that balance, and any examples, success or failure? Yeah.
So let's be super clear, right? This is product management work, right? So what you just described, the challenge that you described, the antidote to that challenge is good product management, right? Because bad product management is iterating based on the evidence that you're collecting and just going with the flow. And I'll give you an example of that, okay? There's a fantastic innovation consultant named Tendai Vicky. He's a friend of mine. He's written some books. He's worked with Strategizer, with Alex Osterwalder. And he told me this story when he used to teach an entrepreneurship class at a university in Kent, in England. And it was an entrepreneurship class where the students form teams in week 1. They come up with an idea, and then they iterate on that idea over the course of the semester. And at the end of 12 weeks, they deliver hopefully a viable business or a business model or something. They validated something. That's the course. Okay. One of the teams signed up and decided that they were going to build a healthy eating food delivery service for students in universities. That was their hypothesis. Okay. And Tendai said, go ahead. That sounds fantastic. And so over the course of 12 weeks, they went out and they did experimentation, and they talked to customers, and they iterated. And at the end of 12 weeks, they delivered, they launched an alcohol delivery service. Right? Why? They started out with healthy eating, and they ended up with alcohol delivery. Why? Because they went and talked to students, and students said, we don't want healthy eating. We want alcohol. Can you deliver that? Right. And so and the reason why that's bad product management is because they lost the thread. They lost the North Star. They lost the vision. They just kind of went wherever the people told them, rather than trying to figure out how to get students to eat healthy. Right. It's challenging, right? That's why it's a problem to solve, And so good product management means that as we start to get feedback or evidence that challenges our assumptions, we need to understand why those assumptions are being challenged and what can be done to overcome those challenges, right? In some cases, we have to choose a different channel or a different marketing approach or a different product or a different combination of features of value proposition, right? There will be situations where maybe we should just kill the hypothesis, right? But the idea here is that if there isn't someone who owns the vision and the success criteria, then the team will drift with the evidence that they collect. And then end up launching an alcohol delivery service when they really want to get kids to eat healthy, right? And so this is product management. A product manager's job is to maintain that vision and to hold the team true to that vision. So when the data comes up and says, we keep getting feedback that people want alcohol delivered to them, well, that's great. That's not what we're doing. Right. What we're doing is getting these folks to eat healthy. And if it's not through delivery, then maybe it's through another channel or another path somehow. So that's the key to doing this.
That's a great example. I love that. I just wanted to also light up a couple of quotes from the audience. Garrison is loving what you were saying, that knowing about what you want to learn and the least amount of effort to make that happen. There's another LinkedIn member saying that amazing to hear Jeff speaks because sense and response is literally the reason that she's a product manager. So I think that inspired me as I was the early readers of the book as well. Yes. So we have a question from Mitchell. You mentioned that vision is owned by a product management team. Have you ever seen instance where design owns the vision and holds the team true to it? I also have a follow-up based on your example is, when do you know if you should stick to that vision versus, let's say, pivoting or changing that vision? How agile and flexible should you be when it comes to like defining that vision, driving that vision? Who should be owning it? How do you get the team to feel like they are owning it together, right? Not just the PM, but also the designer, the engineers, and everybody in the team.
So let's talk about ideals, right? The ideal situation, and you hear Jeff Patton talking about this, you hear Teresa Torres talk about this, you hear lots of folks, Melissa Perry, et cetera, is this product trio, right? Where design, product, and engineering have leads, design lead, product manager, and the engineering lead work together to define the vision, to own the vision, and to drive the team forward. That's the ideal situation. In absence of a trio, almost without exception, the product manager is typically the person who will own the vision. Have I seen where design owns the vision unilaterally? Yes. In fact, I've been in that position myself where I've been the senior designer on an initiative. The product manager was a relatively junior person. And so as kind of the senior person on the team, I owned the vision for it and held the team to it, which is great, right? In that sense, because I was able to provide both the design insight, the user advocacy, and the data that the product manager needed to keep that going. But in an ideal situation, we've got a collaboration between product design and engineering. To answer Shavi's question about when do you pivot, look, we experiment and we learn to validate our hypothesis. Hypothesis could be big, like we're going to build this service, and the hypotheses could be tactical. We're going to launch this feature. We're collecting enough data to justify the effort that we're putting forward, right? And so if we are not getting the evidence that justifies the effort to move forward with something, and we've tried this way, and we've tried that way, and we've tried a variety of different channels, at some point, it might be better off to abandon the feature altogether, right? And so I'll give you an example of that, right? I'll give you a tactical example of that. A tactical example of that could be, I was working with a media company a few years ago, and they were out in the market testing video players for their news product. And the feedback that they were getting continuously was, we don't want video in our news product. Stop pushing video into the user experience. And they kept iterating on the video player and moving the controls and where it was placed and when it started playing and when it stopped playing and this and that. And the feedback continuously was, please don't put video into the user experience, right? At which point that team shifted their vision away from a video-driven news product because the feedback was consistent and overwhelming. No video in the experience. So it's about, and look, there's no, I can't quantify for you when to make the pivot or when to kill a hypothesis, right? I can't say when you've heard this 40 times, that's when you should kill it, right? It's a feeling for the team, right? There's a lot of inspiration in lean UX and lean startup in design thinking from scientific method, right? We run experiments, we collect data, we make decisions, but we're not really doing science. We're collecting evidence that's going to help us make an informed decision. And if time after time, experiment after experiment, the data keeps coming back negative, at some point we got to say, look, we're wasting time here. We need to try something else.
That makes sense. I wanted to ask, as we're coming up on time, shift to the gears a little bit to the latest book that you had, Forever Employable. Yeah. You do have, I think, what was a 5-step process in that book to how to build your thought leadership, your expertise, and how to stay forever employable. I want to add one layer as part of my question. How do you see if that's still shaping out for like all the generative AI? You know, everybody's worrying, are they still going to stay employed? So just like wanted to get your tips and thoughts on, you know, how to stay relevant and forever employable.
Yeah. And look, and to be fair, Forever Employable came out in 2020 at this point. So well ahead of all the ChatGPT mania. Look, the bottom line is we see disruptive technology all the time, and that technology ends up changing jobs or creating new opportunities and new jobs. I firmly believe that what we're seeing now with this generative AI tools is going to automate or at least take out a lot of the monotony of the jobs that we have to do already. So take out the monotony out of design, the monotony out of product management, the monotony out of engineering. And my hope is that it will free us up to do the things that humans do best, which is be creative and innovative. If we can outsource the repetitive tasks, the monotonous tasks, the things that have a pattern to them, where we essentially are filling out blanks in a form or a formalized process, then we free up a tremendous amount of brain power for creativity and innovation. And so I would think about that, right? If these generative AI tools can create basic wireframes, it's kind of like when we had design systems. Everybody was terrified when design systems came out. What do we need UX designers for? We've got Bootstrap, right? We can just use that. Right. And yet we still have UX designers, right? They just don't have to create systems from scratch anymore. And they can use those systems to build interactive prototypes much more quickly. The same thing's going to happen here. It's going to disrupt our jobs. It's going to involve our jobs, but it's going to remove the boring, monotonous, repetitive, uninteresting parts that we can automate today and free up our brain power to be more creative and innovative. That's what I believe to be true. There'll be some turmoil. No doubt about it. There'll be some stumbling, but we'll find our way.
Do you think people should continue? Because I think part of your methodology in the book was laying out how people should plant a flag, create their thought leadership content. Do you think that still hold true, or content has been bloated up so much that, yeah?
No, I think it's absolutely true. I think there's tons of content, and certainly things like ChatGPT are going to create a lot more content out there. But the bottom line is authentic, strong opinions backed by authentic experience can't be faked, right? You can't automate that. No chatbot is going to have the experience to do that. And so to me, that is the power of thought leadership and experience, is that you've done the work. You've been through it, and you can share very specific experiences and feelings and challenges that no technology can fake or automate. And so I strongly believe that there's a tremendous amount of space for humans left in this world, and that your ability to create a place for yourself is still there, right? Maybe it's again, it's about sort of how do we then take the newest tools available to us and use them to optimize the jobs that we currently have. That becomes a super interesting flag to plant, and I'm seeing that with a lot of folks online already. How to use ChatGPT to get better at X or get better at Y, right? I think it's a real opportunity there.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the mindset that I really love from another speakers that I interview in the past on the show was thinking of coach and player. So we essentially become the coach, and AI becomes the player. So as in many sports, the coach, I'm playing better than the player. So that's not the point. But how do you coach the player to play better for you? I think that's probably the mindset to stick. We're coming up on time. So I just wanted to thank you again, Jeff, for sharing your wealth of knowledge and wisdom with us. On our show, we have a tradition where we ask a round of lightning questions. Are you ready for the challenge?
I am. I hope so. Let's see what happens.
Drum Rose. Okay, so the first question is, what is your favorite product currently and why?
It might be an unpopular opinion at the moment, but we just got one recently, and I love my Tesla Model 3. It's a revelation in driving a car. It's just above and beyond a more interesting and fun driving experience than. And I've had a lot of cars in my life, and this is by far. Like, I don't want to drive anything else. That's all.
That's awesome. Who would you say are the most influential product role model in your career?
For me, from a product perspective, I'm gonna call out my co-author and partner, Josh Seiden. I've been working side by side with Josh for 15 years. I've learned a ton from him. He's my friend too. And then I'll shout out Melissa Perry, who's done a tremendous job building a product business and really she's living the work, right? Experimentation, iteration, learning, continuous improvement. Really amazing.
That's awesome. What is one final piece of advice or resource that you would like to share with the product community?
I think the resource, the bit of advice is always kind of always be learning. I think that's the key here. It's easy to get stagnant, and it's super easy to rest on your laurels once you get a little bit of success. And I'm guilty of this too. I get super comfortable, but if you can push yourself into some uncomfortable situations, push yourself to read books that maybe are outside the level of interest that you normally have, I think you'll find a lot of inspiration to push you forward and to really give you a sense of where to go next. And it's something that I've learned a lot from in the last 5 or 6 years, from surrounding myself with a group of entrepreneurs from various industries and not just tech. And that's been really interesting to me.
That's awesome. I think it really resonated with the community. Always be learning. Thank you so much, Jeff, for spending, this time with us. Danielle said this was extremely thought-provoking and a great way to spend lunch. And soon Danielle's from East Coast, probably. So thank you so much for spending time with us. We're honored to have you here today. And thanks again, Jeff. And folks, stay tuned. Next Friday, we have a talk on responsible AI. So more topics to come. And thanks again. All right.
Thanks,
Have
Shivi.
a great weekend. Bye.
Bye, everybody.